Okay, hi folks. So this PowerPoint is looking at data collection. And again, it's highlighting what you've read in your chapter, but kind of bringing it, encapsulating it to give you a better view of things you really should be thinking about. So qualitative data collection techniques, and this is from page 83, and I've rearranged them a little bit differently from the way they appear on the page. So what is it that how can you get information? Well, you can get them from archival sources, so things like handbooks, student records, portfolios, student work, anything that exists that you can mine for information. Tools for capturing everyday life would include things like learning logs, journals, photographs, videos, checklists, rating scales, exhibits, oral history, narrative stories, observation, and inventory. And a lot of these are used, not just one, but 2 or 3 of them are used to really get information for a qualitative research project. Tools for questioning could be interviews, focus group interviews, surveys, questionnaires, rating scales, etc. So all of these data collection techniques are designed to give the researcher a rich pool of information from which to do the analysis. There are 3 primary fieldwork strategies. So once you've decided on what you want to do in terms of data collection, then think about how this is going to play out in the field. So they call it the 3 E's. So experiencing, inquiring, and examining. So experiencing through direct observation. There are 3 different kinds of observers. So a participant observer is a researcher and a participant. Researcher is a participant in the activity under study. So a participant observer then is research of one's own teaching practice. You're not teachers yet, so you're clearly not going to be a participant observer. You could be a privileged active observer, which is the observation of one's students in another setting. Again, you're not practicing teachers in a classroom, so you're not going to be doing that either. You could, however, be a passive observer, an observation in a non-teaching role. When you're in the field and doing observing, whether it be any one of those 3 ways, you need to take field notes. Okay, so that's a running record of what you see. And here are 3 sort of heuristics for thinking about field notes. Observe everything and record everything you possibly can. Now, having said that, it's impossible to record everything, but think about what your research questions are. What is it you want to know? And record what you can. You should also look for nothing in particular. So this means sort of looking beyond the routine, okay? You'll find some surprising things if you open your mind to beyond what you expect to find. And then look for paradoxes, those little bumps in the road, those things that are contradictory, that are unexpected, okay? They will say a lot and help you to really think about your research questions and the answer to those research questions. So inquiring is about asking questions. And it could be an informal ethnographic interview. So this is a conversation, but it's sort of a loose, informal conversation, but there needs to be a set of questions for backup. Oops, I'm sorry, there's a typo there. If the participant is not forthcoming with information or gets off track. So even if you decide to do an informal interview, you still need to have a set of questions as a backup. Then what's most common is a structured formal interview. And this is talking about an individual interview where you construct a set of questions, and those set of questions are asked of all participants. You can't have a set of questions for one participant and another set for another, because that won't give you valid data. These are usually open-ended questions to garner the richest data. If you ask closed-ended questions, you're going to get yes or no's, and that's not going to be terribly useful to you. It could be a closed-ended question with an extension. So you could get a yes or no, but, or yes or no, and. Recording the interview will save you lots of note-taking, but transcribing the audio tape can be very time-consuming. And even if you audio tape, you still want to take notes to remind you of highlights. I'm not saying you shouldn't audio tape, but you will have to transcribe it. You will have to type it out, and that takes a long time to do. If you only have 1 or 2 interviews, it's not a problem. If you've got more than that, then it can be really time-consuming. Also important is just to decide who and where you will interview. Okay, so who are you going to interview and where you're going to do it. Location is important. I had a friend once who thought it would be great to do an interview at Starbucks but not realizing that she was audio taping and that all the background noise just completely drowned out what she was trying to get from her participants. So think about where you would interview. The location has a lot to do with how much information the person may be willing to give you, okay? So those are things to think about. So you could also do a focus group interview. So this is an interview with a group of people. So you get, say, 4 or 5 people, and you have questions, and those questions are posed to the group. So all the participants get the same questions, and all the members of the group have an opportunity to answer. Focus group interviews are very interesting because once the question is posed and someone answers, then somebody will sort of piggyback off that, and somebody else will add to that. So it's a very rich data set to get, because you often get information you don't ask for. And you can use that information because it's all forthcoming from these participants in response to a question. So these are kind of fun to do, and you get a lot of good information. But again, taking notes for this kind of an interview can be time-consuming and difficult. Audio taping is great, but the transcription of focus group interviews is even more difficult because you've got to discern where one person stops and one person begins and be able to type those out. Not saying you shouldn't do it because there's great information there, but just be aware. You could do email interviews. Again, you would use the same set of questions for all participants, but the thing with email interviews is that you kind of get short, cut and dried answers. You don't get that chance for expansion if you're face-to-face or in a focus group. And you can also do a questionnaire, but again, this also limits the amount of information participants give. They're not bad, and if you want to limit the information you get, they're fine. But the more information you get, the better, the richer the resource, the better the analysis. So examining is looking at things, okay? And I talked about this in another slide about using archival or artifacts. I have that listed there, both of them, but they're kind of the same. Again, you're not going to be privy to archives of a school, so you can't do that. But you could look at what's public. You could look at their website. That's an artifact, a school website, and looking at what's there and what's not. You could look at student handbooks and do a comparison of handbooks from one school to another. You'd have to have a reason you want to do that. What is your research question? What action do you want to take to come out of this? Okay. It could be that you look at how teams are constructed in middle schools and look at various websites to see what they are. If you're doing a social justice theoretical standpoint, you could look at how those teams are named and what connotations are there connotations to those names? Do they imply any sort of political agenda? Lots of ways of looking at that sort of stuff. You could look at student journals or journals from historical journals. I have the journals from my aunt, and I also have the journals from my father-in-law. They're not educational journals, but I mean, if I were going to do an ethnographic study, I could look at those and do an analysis of what was recorded in daily life in the times in which they lived. So, I mean, if you had access to the journals from a teacher, then that's something you might want to do. If you have access to journals from a student, you could certainly do that. Some of you have children. You may want to actually look at some of their schoolwork and do a little research project there. You have to give your consent to do it, though, remember. Maps, okay, so that's sort of drawing, mapping out places and looking at the location of things and why things are in a certain place. What's the agenda behind that location, the location of various items. High school classrooms are very interesting, looking at various high school classrooms and how they're constructed. Some classrooms are very traditional, almost 19th century, with seats all facing forward with a teacher on a raised lectern. Others are very, with tables and chairs, centers. So that's a very interesting, construction to look at. Again, you need a theoretical frame and a research question to do that, but it's something that would be interesting to map out different classrooms. You could look at videos and audios and photos. Videos and audio take a long time to listen to and watch and to analyze. Okay, so I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but think about the time that's required to do that. Same with film. Photographs aren't quite so bad. Looking at photographs could be interesting, but again, it has to have something to do with education. So depending on what you want to do, it certainly could be a possibility. And I already mentioned artifacts. And then your field notes are examining as well. So if you do observation and take field notes, the examining of those field notes falls under that category. On page 98, there's a key concepts box for using records, so you might take a look at that as well. So why am I giving you all these three different sort of strategies? Because you need to triangulate your data. Okay, what that means is that you need to look at several methods of data collection in order to show validity and reliability. If you only do one thing, you can't show that as valid and reliable because it can't be triangulated. So on page 99, there's a nice graphic that shows those three areas and how you could choose something from each area. And that way, you can check your data for reliability and validity by examining each data set for similar content. So if it's valid and reliable, that means you've asked the same questions, that you should be showing some data that's similar in each one of those data sets. Okay? And if you don't, then there's something that's off a little bit. So this is important because qualitative research has been, again, I noted this last week, often is looked at as sort of second best to quantitative because you can triangulate quantitative. You can, the reliability and validity is easy to prove. Qualitative researchers have to do a little more legwork, but it can be done, and we need to make sure that we're being ethical, okay, and that we're presenting the research in a way that we've triangulated it to show validity and reliability. There's another step for validity and reliability, and that is inter-rater reliability, where you have looked at your data, you've coded it. We'll talk more about coding later. And then you asked your peers to also look at this data and code it, and then you compare to see if the coding is similar, okay? And if there's at least a 70% match, we can consider the coding to be reliable and valid. Okay, we'll talk more about coding, what that looks like. But basically, it's when you look at you look at themes that are coming out of the data, and you assign a code to that theme, so that as you read the data, you can just mark it with this particular code that you assign it. So you haven't got to be writing out these long pieces of information, and it makes it much easier to analyze the data. Again, that's for a little bit later. Okay, that's it. So folks, I appreciate your time. Please let me know if you have any questions, and I'll be talking to you soon.